Good morning, everybody. In 1912, in a boys' magazine in England, people read about a young boy raised by monkeys. What a strange story, people thought. And that was the first Tarzan story. And it was on this date in 1918 that the first Tarzan movie came out, beginning a love affair with that story. This map shows the routes of the explorers and the discoverers during the Age of Discovery. And it wasn't long before tales of shipwrecks and people being marooned were circulating through Western Europe. This is one of the oldest shipwreck stories, Robinson Crusoe, which goes back to 1719. Based on a true story, the fellow was marooned for about 20 years. This is a still from the 1954 movie Robinson Crusoe, reminding us that Hollywood loves these stories. The Nile River begins in Central Africa around Lake Victoria. And in the middle of the 1800s, there was a real push to find the source of the Nile. So lots of people explored this part of Central Africa, including David Livingstone. These are the various routes that David Livingstone took. He was a missionary. He was also looking for the source of the Nile. Notice the orange lines at the top of the map. That was the region that Livingstone explored, and at one point he disappeared. So here's Henry Stanley supposedly saying, "Dr. Livingstone, I presume." In 1869, the New York Herald had put out a prize for anybody who could find Livingstone. So Stanley took it up, found him in 1871 on the shores of Lake Tanganyika in western Tanzania. And a few years later, Stanley himself explored the Congo River basin, and this red line shows the route of the Congo. So more and more people are learning about Africa. In 1885, the book King Solomon's Mines came out. This was an adventure story. The idea was that there was great wealth in Africa, dating back to King Solomon of the Bible. Here's a still from the 1950 movie. And it had all the elements of this kind of story: a lost map, a secret cave, a magic door, exotic people. Here's a still from the 1950 movie again. And one thing that made this movie special was it was filmed in Africa, largely. Rudyard Kipling wrote The Jungle Book in 1894. It was set in India, and it involved a young boy raised by animals. So here's Mowgli being raised by wolves, but it's more about how do you be a good human. The wolves have traits of honesty and integrity, and they teach those to Mowgli. So the Tarzan story is a little bit different. So here's the first Tarzan story, 1912. It first was in a magazine, then it became a book, and there were many, many books. The plot is the Greystoke family is marooned on the shores of Africa. The parents die. The young baby is raised by monkeys, later meets Jane, etc., etc. Our event is on this date in 1918. The first Tarzan movie came out. Here it is. It was a silent movie, and the sequel to it was also silent. Now this is Johnny Weissmiller. He was a gold medal swimmer. He was quite famous in the 1920s as a swimmer, but he became famous in the 1930s as Tarzan. And here he is with Jane. He made lots of Tarzan movies in the 1930s and 40s, and some of us remember his yell as he swung from tree to tree. Here's an 80s version of the Tarzan story. There have been lots of versions of the story, animated, etc. In 1933, this book came out, Lost Horizon. It introduced the world to Shangri-La, a magical place up in the mountains. And here's a still from the 1937 movie. People are marooned in the Himalayas. They get found by some people who take them to this magic valley where people live to be very old. There's peace. Here's another still from the movie. And this idea of a mystical, peaceful place really resonated with people in the 1930s. So all of us have a favorite story, don't we, of a faraway place. And perhaps the Tarzan stories are the most well known.